The smell of roasted garlic and rosemary floated through the warm air of Le Jardin, one of the trendiest restaurants in the city. Candlelight glowed off polished tables, silverware sparkled, and soft jazz played under the chatter of well-dressed diners. To most, it was perfection. To Clara Beaumont, the owner, it was a reflection of herself. Refined, elegant, exclusive. She stood near the entrance, watching the maitre d' guide another couple to their table. "Seat them by the window," she instructed quietly, "and make sure their glasses stay full this time." Business had been good lately. Reviews were glowing, her reservations were booked weeks in advance, and a rumor had begun to spread. A mystery critic from Gourmet Life magazine, the publication that could make or break a restaurant, was coming sometime this month. Clara was determined to impress. So, when the door opened suddenly and a man stepped in, tall but hunched, his coat tattered, his shoes worn, the air in the room shifted. Conversations faltered, heads turned. The man smiled faintly, brushing snow off his sleeves. "Evening. Just need a warm meal. I can pay." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir, I think you might be more comfortable somewhere else." He tilted his head. "I heard this place has the best stew in town." She forced a polite smile. "We have a dress code. I'm afraid I can't seat you like this." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "I've got money. Cash." Clara's tone hardened. "It's not about the money. My guests expect a certain atmosphere. Please don't make this difficult." A waiter near the bar shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Beaumont, maybe we could—" "No," she cut in sharply. "We're full tonight." The man looked around the half-empty dining room, then back at her. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet disappointment. "I see," he said softly. "Didn't mean to trouble you, ma'am." He turned and stepped back into the cold. Clara sighed, brushing invisible dust from her blazer. People need to understand this isn't a soup kitchen. But at the corner table, an elderly couple exchanged a glance. The husband murmured, "That man, he looked familiar." The wife frowned. "Where have I seen him before?" Outside, the wind howled, scattering snow down the empty street. The man pulled his coat tighter and smiled faintly to himself. He'd seen enough. Tomorrow, the world would see her. The next morning, the city was coated in frost. Clara arrived at Le Jardin early, her heels clicking across the empty dining room. She was in a good mood until her assistant, Nora, rushed in holding her phone, her face pale. "Ms. Beaumont, you need to see this." Clara frowned. "What is it?" Nora handed her the phone. On the screen was the front page of Gourmet Life magazine's online edition, headline bold and brutal. "Kindness not on the menu. A lesson from Le Jardin." Clara's heart skipped. She began to read. "Last night I visited one of the city's most talked about restaurants. I came unannounced, underdressed, and honest, seeking not luxury, but humanity. What I found was warmth in the kitchen, but coldness at the door." Her stomach twisted. The owner, Ms. Clara Beaumont, turned away a paying guest who appeared homeless. It's a shame, because her food might be exquisite, but I'll never know. In a world hungry for compassion, Le Jardin seems to have lost its taste for it. The article ended with a simple line. Thomas Gray, Senior Food Critic, Gourmet Life magazine. Clara's mouth went dry. "Thomas Gray," she whispered. Nora nodded. "The critic everyone's been waiting for." The room spun. She sank into a chair, gripping the phone. "It can't be. That man, he was wearing rags. I thought he was—" "A human being," Nora finished quietly. By noon, the story had gone viral. Local news picked it up. People flooded Le Jardin's social media with comments, some angry, some mocking. Elitist restaurant refuses homeless man. What a disgrace. Guess empathy isn't on the menu. Cancellations poured in. A charity dinner withdrew its booking. One supplier even called to reconsider the partnership. Clara tried to do damage control. She drafted statements, called PR firms, and even filmed a forced apology video. But nothing stopped the storm. That evening, when she returned to the now-empty restaurant, she found a letter waiting on the counter. No name, just a simple envelope sealed with wax. Inside was a handwritten note. Everyone deserves a seat at the table, Clara. Some just come hungrier than others. TG. She stared at the words until her vision blurred. For the first time in years, the silence of her own restaurant felt deafening. And for the first time in her life, she realized what hunger really meant. The next few days were a blur of calls, cancellations, and sleepless nights. Clara barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore. The confident restaurateur, with perfect posture and sharper words, had been replaced by a woman haunted by her reflection on every news page. The staff avoided her eyes. The once crowded dining room now stood silent, like a monument to arrogance. She tried to move on, to open the doors again, to start anew, but every time she saw the empty tables, she saw him. The man with kind eyes, standing in the doorway, saying softly, "Didn't mean to trouble you, ma'am." The words echoed endlessly in her head. Finally, one cold afternoon, Clara made a decision. She wasn't going to write another apology or hire another PR firm. She was going to find Thomas Gray herself and tell him she was sorry. She started with the Gourmet Life office downtown, a sleek building of glass and steel. The receptionist blinked when she introduced herself. "You're Clara Beaumont?" Clara nodded, clutching her purse. "I need to speak to Mr. Gray." The receptionist checked her screen, then frowned. "I'm afraid Mr. Gray doesn't keep an office here. He submits remotely, travels constantly. Do you know where he's staying?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. He doesn't share personal details, but I can forward a message." Clara left the note, short, handwritten, shaky. "I'd like to apologize in person, please." "You were right." She didn't expect a reply. But 2 days later, a small card arrived at Le Jardin, slipped under the door. "If you really want to apologize, meet me where the hungry eat for free." T.G. Clara read it 3 times before realizing what it meant. The next morning, she drove across the city, past the boutiques and high-rises, to a rundown block near the river. There, between 2 old warehouses, stood a small shelter called St. Matthew's Community Kitchen. Inside, volunteers moved through the narrow space, ladling soup, serving bread, laughing softly with the people who came in from the cold. And at the center of it all, wearing the same worn coat she'd once turned away, was Thomas Gray, smiling as he poured coffee for an old man in a wheelchair. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable, then nodded toward her. "Ms. Beaumont, you found me." She swallowed hard. "I did." He handed off the coffee pot to another volunteer and walked over. Up close, he looked exactly as he had that night. Humble, calm, kind. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice trembling. "I was wrong. About you. About everything." He tilted his head. "You weren't wrong about what you saw. You saw a man who looked poor, and you reacted the way most people do. That's why I write what I write." "I humiliated you," she whispered. "I turned you away." Thomas smiled gently. "You didn't humiliate me. You revealed yourself. The good news is, revelation's the first step to change." Tears burned behind her eyes. "Yet how do I make it right?" He gestured to the crowded room, the volunteers, the steaming pots, the people laughing despite their hunger. "You already know how. Feed them. Feed the ones no one else sees." She looked around, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest. "Can I help?" He smiled. "There's always room at the table." That night, for the first time in years, Clara Beaumont tied an apron around her waist. Not as a chef or an owner, but as a servant. She ladled soup, washed dishes, listened to stories from the forgotten, and realized that somewhere between the laughter and the clatter of plates, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. And as Thomas passed her by, offering her a tired but warm smile, she thought, maybe this was what real success tasted like. The morning light filtered through the windows of Le Jardin, but the golden glow only highlighted how empty it was. Tables were perfectly set, cutlery gleaming, but there were no customers. The air felt stale, the scent of yesterday's arrogance still hanging in the silence. Clara stood alone in the middle of her once famous restaurant, the note from Thomas Gray still in her hand. "Feed them. Feed the ones no one else sees." She read it again, and this time it felt like a command, not advice. By noon, she gathered her staff. The cooks, servers, and managers stood in a quiet circle, exchanging uncertain glances. Nora, her assistant, looked worried. Clara, are we closing? Clara shook her head slowly. No, she said. We're reopening, but not like before. There was confusion in the room. One of the chefs frowned. Ma'am, we've lost all our high-end reservations. The critics, I know, she said gently. And they were right. She looked around the dining room, her voice steady. This place was built to impress people who could afford luxury. I forgot that food isn't supposed to divide people. It's supposed to bring them together. So, from now on, Le Jardin isn't just a restaurant. It's a kitchen for everyone. Nora blinked. You mean, Clara nodded. Half our menu will remain for paying guests. The other half, free meals for anyone who needs one. No judgment, no questions. They sit where everyone else sits. There was a long pause. Then slowly, one of the servers smiled. I'd like to stay for that. Another added quietly, Me too. The chef crossed his arms, skeptical. And how do we afford that? Clara smiled faintly. By doing what we should have done from the start. Cooking with heart, not ego. I'll take a pay cut, and I'll call a few partners who still believe in compassion. That evening, Le Jardin reopened. Not with glamour, but with soul. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled, but now they lit up faces that had never been welcome there before. Construction workers, elderly neighbors, single mothers, a few men and women who clearly hadn't had a warm meal in days. And standing quietly at the back, observing, was Thomas Gray. When their eyes met, Clara walked over. You came, she said softly. He smiled. You invited me, without knowing it. She chuckled, wiping her hands on her apron. You inspired this. I thought you should see what you started. Thomas looked around, taking in the laughter, the clatter of plates, the smell of fresh bread. I didn't start this, he said gently. You did. You just had to lose everything to find it. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching a little boy at the next table savor his soup like it was the finest thing in the world. Clara turned to Thomas. Would you stay for dinner? He smiled. Only if I get to pay this time. She laughed. Deal. Later that night, when the last guests left, Clara blew out the candles and looked around the room. For the first time, the emptiness was gone. Le Jardin wasn't perfect anymore. It was better. It was human. And as she locked the door behind her, she realized that she'd finally created the kind of restaurant worth writing about. One where every person, no matter who they were, had a seat at the table.